Hello and welcome, everybody, to another episode of Coaching from the Heart. We are back today with a live show. It's wonderful to be back. And joining me, as always, is my good friend, colleague, and co host, Harold Feddersen. Hey, Harold.
Hi, Tyler.
Thanks for joining me again, as always. It's good to be back after I've been kind of on and off the last couple weeks, but we're back, and today's topic for the show is self and self-image, and that might sound like gibberish to you. So we're gonna dive into what the heck we mean by that here in a minute. But oh, my Siri just went off. Sorry about that, everybody. This is live radio, so anything can happen. But before we jump into the topic at hand, I just want to tell people where they can find us both. As Harold and I are both professional transformative coaches, we walk with people both individually and in groups to transform their lives. And so if you're interested in that, you can find me, Tyler, at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com, and find all my contact information there. Lots of fun links and free videos and articles and all sorts of cool stuff. So look me up there. And Harold, where can everyone find you?
I can be found at www.haroldfeddersen.ca.
Fantastic. And I believe that is also now, you can just find those links at the bottom of the video on YouTube. So, all right, let's jump into it. Harold, you're going to set the table for the topic today, as we decided 5 seconds before the show. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing what we're going to be talking about.
Here where spontaneously we're going to be going.
It's another live thing. So
Yeah. Okay, so I think there are a couple different directions we could go. Maybe we'll just start with so what are the two things? So there's self and self-image, not versus self-image. These are not two things that are competing against each other, but they're two coexisting things. So the self, now let's start with self-image. That's probably easier.
Yeah.
So self-image is who we believe we are, how we believe others perceive us, and generally the patterns or conditions that we have that interact with the world at large.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like me. My self-image is Harold Feddersen, coach teacher. You're the great Tyler Thurman.
Yeah, another word, and I'm sorry to jump in, but another word we might use is just our identity, right? Who we identify ourselves as. And that's made up of a bunch of different stuff, right? Our thinking, our behavior, our memory. It's mostly thinking, but because an image suggests something in the mind, right? An image in the mind of who we think we are. So yeah, go ahead. Back to you.
So that's the self-image aspect of it, and then the self part is the one that's a little bit trickier to talk about, because we can just use fancy labels. But one thing I was thinking would be an interesting way to enter into this conversation is Zen koans. Are you familiar with? I don't know. You probably are.
It sounds like gibberish to me. So explain away.
So a koan is it was used or is used in the Zen tradition, and a koan is either a short question, statement, or story that is designed to evoke or awaken an aspect of your being that is more dormant. So normally, like the question, one of the famous koans is, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" And So immediately our thinking mind is like, oh, what would, and you probably grab your hand, you're like, what does that sound like, because your thinking mind wants to take it on and solve it as though it is an answerable problem.
Yeah.
But in the Zen tradition, the whole point of it is to awaken the being that exists prior to the whole thought structure. And one of the koans that sort of brings me into the arena that we're in about the self is what was the appearance of your face before your parents were born?
Mm.
And so for there's a moment just before there's just this moment where we're in this place where our thinking mind doesn't get it, but something else almost comes alive in us. Something else, some form of curiosity almost bubbles to the surface about what that is. And so I think that's one way to look at what the self is in the
Yeah.
self and self-image.
Harold, I really like what you're saying there, because I think what you're speaking to is sort of before. It's almost like it's before the self concept, because we've got all this sort of prefabbed ideas and notions and like you said, behaviors that we're just kind of on autopilot. We're used to thinking about ourselves in a certain way, thinking about the world in a certain way, beliefs and values and all that. It's almost like just back it up, right? Just before all of that. Um, it's kind of funny because I've never really thought of it in that way. But what's come pop into my head is maybe when you wake up in the morning, right? Before you remember
Yeah,
who you are and where you are, right? This person that, for me, is this person that is Tyler, this separate individual in the world, what's there before that? What's in that space? And I like the word you're using there, being, as kind of uh, a synonym for self, right? That it's something that's it just is. It's just true. It's just and I like the dormancy too. It's kind of lying dormant for most of us, um, a lot of the time, and yeah,
that space between sleep and what we call wake, that is a really beautiful threshold to become familiar with, because you can as you play with it, because for most of my life it was either sleep or bang, I'm awake, my brain is just going, and off we are to the races. But as I've practiced this stuff that we talk about all the time, that threshold has become much larger, and you actually, there's so much space in there where you can play, where you really, you really don't, you're waking, but you haven't formed, you haven't formed everything yet, and the brain hasn't just clicked into gear, so to speak.
right, yeah. You haven't started on the track of the. It's
To-do
almost like,
list.
yeah, it's almost like there's this tape that we got to push play in the morning. It's the Tyler loop or the Harold
Yeah.
cassette, right? And then you sort of, you, we're kind of we're doing a lot of sleepwalking throughout the day.
Yeah,
Um,
because we're on this
we're
autopilot.
on this autopilot that
We're
is
living to-do list.
that is a wonderful representation of the self-image, right? That's basically what that is. Um, and I think maybe we could back this conversation up a tiny bit to um, the self-image part, because it's tricky because most people, not most people, but probably a lot of people have never considered that their self-image is not their self.
Right.
Right. So I think we jumped into this self, like, oh, there's this beautiful space and this thing that we can't talk about because words don't do it justice, and yada yada yada. Right. It's the kind of thing you and I talk about a lot on this show, and just between us. off air too. But I think a lot of people they're probably scratching their head going, wait, so the ideas I have about myself and the thinking and the everything that goes with that, that's not necessarily me. That's kind of there's a bit of a leap there, I think. So when I first kind of came across that, had some insights about that, um, some experiences of the self, in the way that we're talking about it with a capital S, as the Course in Miracles would put it. Um, that was kind of a big thing for me, for to be able to have that even be a distinction, right? That maybe I'm not who I think I am, right? Maybe there's more to me, or there's more to this thing called life, or there's just something behind the scenes that I wasn't previously aware of. That because for most people, most of the time, autopilot that's just what we know. That's what we think is reality. That's true. And in fairness, it's true for you whenever you're in it. That's your experience. But there's something else that, that we're referring to as the self. There's something uh, it's just different. There's something different than who we think we are. Um, and that can be, even if you just stop there, that can be a huge insight in my experience, because there's all these ideas that we have about ourselves that aren't um, they aren't very nice, to put it simply. Um, we're not very kind in our how we think about ourselves typically, and so we've got a very harsh inner dialogue that can really be an obstacle to us living a more wonderful life, having a more beautiful experience of life. And so I just wanted to go back to that, to the core distinction, as identifying that there is a distinction there. Yeah, go ahead, Harold.
And I think your point there is important too, because most of our self-image, most of our inner dialogue self-image is negative.
Sure,
You know?
absolutely, yeah.
And then what's interesting is to watch how we create a false confidence by saying the opposite.
Right.
So we bounce back and forth between these two, self-deprecating and then like I always think of it like a balloon. Like you fill up the balloon and then you squeak out the balloon. You fill up the balloon, and it's just this constant like accordion movement.
Yeah.
Up and in and out, in and out. Beat yourself up, pick yourself out, beat yourself down, pick yourself up. And there's another option altogether, which is
Right.
just if you're going to speak about yourself, just speak about the facts of yourself. Like you and I, just before the show started, one of our self-image things is that you and I, we like to take things we're just like relaxed and slow. Like that's just part of our self-image thing. And there's no sort of judgment about it, although we were having a good laugh.
Which I'm sure none of our viewers notice that we like to, take our time laying out our ideas and our experiences. Nobody knows what you're talking about, Harold.
No. So it's interesting to know that, it doesn't have to be a beat up or a cheerleader,
Sure.
Like it doesn't have to be those two. It can just be this thing like, oh yeah, I have this thing where I always, yell at people who cut me off in traffic or whatever.
It doesn't have to be this thing that we demonize, which is I think that's what you're talking about. It's this negative. Oftentimes, it's this negative thing, and then we we try to take that thing that is the self-image, and then it just becomes a positive thing, but it's still the self-image, right? It's like what you're saying, it's not just flipping the self-image and make it's something else entirely. And I believe that's what you're pointing to is and that's kind of the path it tends to take. I think that was the path that my sort of evolution in discovering um, that was, oh, I'll just you know I'll not hate myself anymore. I'll not say naughty things about myself. I'll prop myself up, right? I'll kind of have all this positive thinking laid over top, and it's
Yeah.
very I think it was potentially useful in me seeing past all of it, but uh, so long as you kind of know that there's something beyond even that. There's something. Um, one of the ways that's coming to mind as far as an analogy for understanding it without making it a big thing, like making it into something I've got to get rid of or demonize. It's kind of what we do with the ego, right? It's the enemy of spirit or something like that, right? And and that just doesn't help at all. Right? That doesn't do us any good. Um, and that's to think about it in terms of language, right? So language is sort of I talk about it as symbols of symbols, right? So if you kind of think about the mind, there's some kind of bottom floor truth to it. We don't really know what it is, can't talk about it. You could probably have an experience of it. Um, and then there's sort of things that, you know, activity in the mind, right? Sometimes we talk about them as images, right? We have images in the mind, things that we think about. Um, and then we put language to those. And language, if you think about it in those terms, it's two steps removed from. So there's language, and then there's the concept or the image or the idea that the language is based on, and then there's the actual truth, right? So it's that's all that the self-image is. It's just a way for us to think about the self. The only problem with that is it's usually not a reflection of that truer self. Um, but in kind of that, I know that's very analytical. It's probably going to make everyone go up in their mind and start analyzing things. But but if you can get away from that and just see, oh, all of my self images is just it's this kind of step removed. It's just an idea, right? It's just this concept. That's another word I use sometimes to talk about the self-image is the self-concept, the concept we have about ourselves. It's just an idea in the mind. And ideas can actually be